History of Queen Cleopatra? When the Greco-Roman period began? The legend of Queen Cleopatra is as immortal as time. Everyone is familiar with the story of her cursed love that shaped the future of the entire history of Egypt. The entire world knows her tale and how she had the power to manipulate the hearts and desires of great rulers such as Caesar. The life of Queen Cleopatra is the story of a true survival that chooses to take control of her life and death. Egyptian history is calcified into 5 sections: Ancient Egyptian Period 3400 BC to 335 BC. The Greco-Roman Period 332 BC to 30 BC. The Coptic Period. The Islamic Period. The Modern Period. When the Greco-Roman Period began? The Greco-Roman period began with the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. When Alexander the Great died, the empire split into many parts between his generals, with the most powerful generals each ruling a section. Egypt eventually fell under the reign of the Macedonian Greek general Ptolemy Isoter. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt in 305 BC and ended with the suicide of Cleopatra, at which time Egypt was annexed by Rome in 30 BC and became part of the Roman Empire. Who is Queen Cleopatra? Queen Cleopatra VII is one of the most famous, beautiful, intelligent, and strong female rulers in history. She was the last ruler of the Macedonian dynasty. Queen Cleopatra was born around 69 BC, and she is the daughter of King Ptolemy XII. In 51 BC, Ptolemy XII died, leaving the throne to 18-year-old Cleopatra and her brother, the 10-year-old Ptolemy XIII. It is likely that the two siblings married, as was customary at the time to maintain the bloodline. History of Queen Cleopatra. Soon after they assumed power, complications arose between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII. Eventually, in 49 BC, Cleopatra fled to Syria, where she assembled an army to defeat her rival brother in order to declare the throne for herself. In 48 BC, she returned to Egypt with her military might and faced her brother at Pelusium, located on the empire's eastern edge. Around this same time, the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey was consuming Rome. Pompey eventually sought refuge in Egypt, but on orders by Ptolemy, Pompey was killed so Ptolemy can win Caesar's good fortune and take him like an ally so he can defeat his sister Cleopatra. But she was able to infiltrate his royal palace and win his favor and make him fall in love with her. Cleopatra now had access to enough military muscle to dethrone her brother and solidify her grip on Egypt as a sole ruler. Caesar was able to defeat Ptolemy's army and even followed him all the way to Alexandria, where he killed him. Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne because he loved her and he desired to take control of Egypt's wealth and treasures so he can fund his climb to power back in Rome. Following Caesar's defeat of Ptolemy's forces at the Battle of the Nile, Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne. Soon after, Ptolemy XIII fled and drowned in the Nile. In 47 BC, Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, whom she called Ptolemy Caesar, known as Caesarion. Cleopatra eventually followed Caesar back to Rome, but returned to Egypt in 44 BC, following his assassination. She ruled Egypt as the queen and her son as the co-regent. Cleopatra became connected with the goddess of motherhood Isis, the wife of the ruler of the underworld Osiris and the mother of the sky god Horus, to declare herself as a holy royalty, and she was often called the new Isis. In 41 BC, Mark Antony, part of the Second Triumvirate. Cleopatra agreed to his request and made a lavish entrance into the city of Tarsus. Captivated by her beauty and personality, Antony plunged into a love affair with Cleopatra that would eventually produce 3 children, including twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. In the year 34 BC, Mark Antony, of Caesar's general, sent a message to Cleopatra asking her to show her allegiance, returned with Cleopatra to Alexandria with a triumphant flair. Cleopatra accepted his request and went to Rome to see him, where she made an extravagant lavish entrance into the city of Tarsus to grab his attention, and in turn, Antony was enchanted by her beauty and her captivating personality. Antony began a love affair with Cleopatra, which led to the birth of 3 children, including twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Crowds swarmed to the gymnasium to catch a glimpse of the couple seated on golden thrones that were elevated on silver platforms. Beside them sat their children. Antony antagonized his rival in 34 BC by declaring Caesar Ion as Caesar's real son and legal heir, rather than Caesar's adoptive son Octavian, whom the revered Roman leader had adopted. Octavian, however, fought back, declaring he'd seized Antony's will, and told the Roman people that Antony had turned over Roman possessions to Cleopatra and that there were plans to make Alexandria the Roman capital. As a result of Octavian's actions, in 32 BC, the Roman Senate stripped Antony of all his titles and declared war on Cleopatra and all her allies. In the year 31 BC, Cleopatra and Antony combined armies to try to defeat Octavian in a raging sea battle at Actium on Greece's west coast. The clash, however, proved to be a costly defeat for the Egyptians, forcing Antony and Cleopatra to flee back to Egypt in Alexandria. Life and reign. Daughter of King Ptolemy XII Auletes, Cleopatra was destined to become the last queen of the Macedonian dynasty that ruled Egypt between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE and its annexation by Rome in 30 BCE. The line had been founded by Alexander's general Ptolemy, who became King Ptolemy Isoter of Egypt. Cleopatra was of Macedonian descent and had little, if any, Egyptian blood, although the classical author Plutarch wrote that she alone of her house took the trouble to learn Egyptian and, for political reasons, styled herself as the new Isis, a title that distinguished her from the earlier Ptolemaic Queen Cleopatra III, who had also claimed to be the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. Coin portraits of Cleopatra show a countenance alive rather than beautiful, with a sensitive mouth, firm chin, liquid eyes, broad forehead, and prominent nose. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, the throne passed to his young son, Ptolemy XIII, and daughter, Cleopatra VII. It is likely, but not proven, that the two married soon after their father's death. The 18-year-old Cleopatra, older than her brother by about 8 years, became the dominant ruler. Evidence shows that the first decree in which Ptolemy's name precedes Cleopatra's was in October of 50 BCE. Soon after, Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt for Syria, where she raised an army and in 48 BCE returned to face her brother at Pelusium, on Egypt's eastern border. The murder of the Roman general Pompey, who had sought refuge from Ptolemy XIII at Pelusium, and the arrival of Julius Caesar brought temporary peace. Cleopatra realized that she needed Roman support, or, more specifically, Caesar's support, if she was to regain her throne. Each was determined to use the other. Caesar sought money for repayment of the debts incurred by Cleopatra's father, Auletes, as he struggled to retain his throne. Cleopatra was determined to keep her throne and, if possible, to restore the glories of the first Ptolemies and recover as much as possible of their dominions, which had included southern Syria and Palestine. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers and spent the winter besieged in Alexandria. Roman reinforcements arrived the following spring, and Ptolemy XIII fled and drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra, now married to her brother Ptolemy XIV, was restored to her throne. In June 47 BCE, she gave birth to Ptolemy Caesar, known to the people of Alexandria as Caesar Ion, or Little Caesar. Whether Caesar was the father of Caesar Ion, as his name implies, cannot now be known. It took Caesar 2 years to extinguish the last flames of Pompeian opposition. As soon as he returned to Rome, in 46 BCE, he celebrated a 4-day triumph, the ceremonial in honor of a general after his victory over a foreign enemy, in which Arsinoe, Cleopatra's younger and hostile sister, was paraded. Cleopatra paid at least one state visit to Rome, accompanied by her husband, brother, and son. She was accommodated in Caesar's private villa beyond the Tiber River and may have been present to witness the dedication of a golden statue of herself in the temple of Venus Genetrix, the ancestress of the Julian family to which Caesar belonged. Cleopatra was in Rome when Caesar was murdered in 44 BCE. Soon after her return to Alexandria, in 44 BCE, Cleopatra's coroller, Ptolemy 14, died. Cleopatra now ruled with her infant son, Ptolemy 15, Caesar. When, at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Caesar's assassins were routed, Mark Antony became the heir apparent of Caesar's authority, or so it seemed, for Caesar's great-nephew and personal heir, Octavian, was but a sickly boy. Antony, now controller of Rome's eastern territories, sent for Cleopatra so that she might explain her role in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination. She entered the city by sailing up the Cydnus River in a barge while dressed in the robes of the new Isis. Antony, who equated himself with the god Dionysus, was captivated. Forgetting his wife, Fulvia, who in Italy was doing her best to maintain her husband's interests against the growing menace of young Octavian, Antony returned to Alexandria, where he treated Cleopatra not as a protected sovereign but as an independent monarch. In Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony formed a society of inimitable livers whose members lived what some historians have interpreted as a life of debauchery and folly and others have interpreted as lives dedicated to the cult of the mystical god Dionysus. In 40 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, whom she named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Antony had already left Alexandria to return to Italy, where he was forced to conclude a temporary settlement with Octavian. As part of this settlement, he married Octavian's sister, Octavia, Fulvia having died. 3 years later, Antony was convinced that he and Octavian could never come to terms. His marriage to Octavia now in irrelevance, he returned to the east and reunited with Cleopatra. Antony needed Cleopatra's financial support for his postponed Parthian campaign. In return, Cleopatra requested the return of much of Egypt's eastern empire, including large portions of Syria and Lebanon and even the rich balsam groves of Jericho. The Parthian campaign was a costly failure, as was the temporary conquest of Armenia. Nevertheless, in 34 BC Antony celebrated a triumphal return to Alexandria. This was followed by a celebration known as the Donations of Alexandria. Crowds flocked to the gymnasium to see Cleopatra and Antony seated on golden thrones on a silver platform with their children sitting on slightly lower thrones beside them. Antony proclaimed Caesar Ion to be Caesar's son, thus relegating Octavian, who had been adopted by Caesar as his son and heir, to legal illegitimacy. Cleopatra was hailed as Queen of Kings, Caesar Ion as King of Kings. Alexander Helios was awarded Armenia and the territory beyond the Euphrates, his infant brother Ptolemy the lands to the west of it. The boy's sister, Cleopatra Selene, was to be ruler of Cyrene. It was clear to Octavian, watching from Rome, that Antony intended his extended family to rule the civilized world. A propaganda war erupted. Octavian seized Antony's will, or what he claimed to be Antony's will, from the temple of the Vestal Virgins, to whom it had been entrusted, and revealed to the Roman people that not only had Antony bestowed Roman possessions on a foreign woman, but intended to be buried beside her in Egypt. The rumor quickly spread that Antony also intended to transfer the capital from Rome to Alexandria. Antony and Cleopatra spent the winter of 32 to 31 BCE in Greece. The Roman Senate deprived Antony of his prospective consulate for the following year, and had then declared war against Cleopatra. The naval battle of Actium, in which Octavian faced the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra on September 2, 31 BCE, was a disaster for the Egyptians. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, and Cleopatra retired to her mausoleum as Antony went off to fight his last battle. Receiving the false news that Cleopatra had died, Antony fell on his sword. In a last excess of devotion, he had himself carried to Cleopatra's retreat and there died, after bidding her to make her peace with Octavian. Cleopatra buried Antony and then committed suicide. The means of her death is uncertain, though classical writers came to believe that she had killed herself by means of an asp, symbol of divine loyalty. She was 39 and had been a queen for 22 years and Antony's partner for 11. They were buried together, as both of them had wished, and with them was buried the Roman Republic. Cleopatra through the ages. The vast majority of Egypt's many hundreds of queens, although famed throughout their own land, were more or less unknown in the outside world. As the dynastic age ended and the hieroglyphic script was lost, the queen's stories were forgotten and their monuments buried under Egypt's sands. But Cleopatra had lived in a highly literate age, and her actions had influenced the formation of the Roman Empire. Her story could not be forgotten. Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, was determined that Roman history should be recorded in a way that confirmed his right to rule. To achieve this, he published his own autobiography and censored Rome's official records. As Cleopatra had played a key role in his struggle to power, her story was preserved as an integral part of his. But it was diminished to just 2 episodes: her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Cleopatra, stripped of any political validity, was to be remembered as an immoral foreign woman who tempted upright Roman men. As such, she became a useful enemy for Octavian, who preferred to be remembered for fighting against foreigners rather than against his fellow Romans. This official Roman version of a predatory, immoral Cleopatra passed into Western culture, where it was retold and reinterpreted as the years passed, until it evolved into a story of a wicked life made good by an honorable death. Meanwhile, Muslim scholars, writing after the Arab conquest of Egypt about 640 CE, developed their own version of the queen. Their Cleopatra was first and foremost a scholar and a scientist, a gifted philosopher and a chemist. Plutarch's Parallel Lives, translated from the Greek into French by Jacques Amyot, 1559, and then from the French into English by Sir Thomas North, 1579, served as the inspiration behind Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra, 1606-07. Shakespeare dropped some of Plutarch's disapproval and allowed his queen to become a true heroine. His was by no means the first revision of Cleopatra, nor was it to be the last, but his is the Cleopatra that has lingered longest in the public imagination. From Shakespeare stems a wealth of Cleopatra-themed art, plays, poetry, paintings, and operas. In the 20th century, Cleopatra's story was preserved and further developed through film. Many actresses, including Theda Bara (1917), Claudette Colbert (1934), and Elizabeth Taylor (1963), have played the queen, typically in expensive, exotic films that concentrate on the queen's love life rather than her politics. Meanwhile, Cleopatra's seductive beauty, a seductive beauty that is not supported by the queen's contemporary portraiture, has been used to sell a wide range of products, from cosmetics to cigarettes. In the late 20th century, Cleopatra's racial heritage became a subject of intense academic debate, with some African American scholars embracing Cleopatra as a Black African heroine. When and how Queen Cleopatra died. Antony soon returned to the battlefield, where he was falsely informed that Cleopatra had died. Upon hearing the news, the despondent Roman leader committed suicide by stabbing himself. Cleopatra followed her lover's demise by ending her life as well by being bitten by an Egyptian cobra. She died on August 12, 30 BC. The two were buried together, as they had wished, and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. She died at the age of 39, and soon after her son Caesarion was arrested and executed. So Egypt annexed to Rome by Caesar Augustus in 30 BC, and he called Egypt Aegyptus, and it became a province of the Roman Empire under his rule. They were responsible for the administration, protection, and finances of the entire province. Cleopatra's skin color. Queen Cleopatra was of Macedonian Greek ancestry, with some Persian and Syrian ancestry. After great research, both history and science proves she was not fully white or black, despite having a black grandmother, but was a pale olive skin with dark hair as portrayed as an Eastern Mediterranean type on her official coins. Tomb of Queen Cleopatra. Since 30 BC, the tomb of Cleopatra and Antony remains hidden, but many scholars believe that it is located near Alexandria, and various expeditions are still searching for this tomb. You may have all the historical facts, but if you cast your eyes on the location that saw this amazing history and feel what they felt, then Egypt Tours Portal is what you are looking for. So you can explore our Egypt tour packages, or Nile River cruises to enjoy a marvelous journey to include all Egypt interests and activities.